Okay, I thought I'd give a quick interior tour of the TBM 900, try to show you what everything on the panel does, and just a little bit of the pilot's view of things in this aircraft. Let's just work through the switches here so we can just see what's up here. This is above the windscreen. We've got our landing light here. It's got taxi mode, landing mode. Basically the taxi mode is kind of half the lights out on the wingtips and the landing is the full. If you're in taxi, you find the switch there, and you got pulse mode on, it will alternate the landing half of the lights on and off so that you get kind of a flashing effect. These are the nav lights on the wingtips, strobe lights, interior panel lights. The dimmer is a temporary cabin light you can turn on here as well, or that's the lights, the switch for the back power, and then a little temporary light for the access lighting, which actually you can see there. The next section is for the kind of master electrical power here, so this would be called the crash bar. This puts on battery power, which we'll do in a second, for a minimal amount of equipment, and then the rest of full battery power is here, and then which generator or the standby alternator, which one you want to be using there. And then you can reset the main generator or the standby alternator with these push buttons if they're having an issue and you want to cycle them. There's the starter switch. It's got an abort position. It stays in the off position normally. You hold it momentarily into the on position for 2 seconds or so when you're ready to start, and that will initiate the start process. The ignition, it's got off, on, and auto. Auto mode effectively means start mode, so it will automatically trigger the igniters on when you're doing your start, and then otherwise it's, even in auto mode, it's always off. So if you're in turbulence, icing, got a low fuel condition, heavy preset, you just put it into the middle on mode, and it'll just tick, 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 tick. Those igniters will fire away much like a gas grill, and they can just keep going for your whole flight if you want them to. But normally the flame inside the engine is perfectly self-sustaining, so you just have it in auto mode. Let's see, then we have the aux BP, which is the auxiliary boost pump there. That's an extra fuel pump, electrically driven. Then you have the fuel selector switch here. It's got manual or auto, and there's a button here for shift, and what that's talking about is the fuel selection for the right or left tanks down here is on a timer, and there's a little motor that cycles it back and forth for you. It's basically every 75 seconds when you're on the ground, or every 5 minutes when you're in flight. It keeps the tanks balanced and prevents you from accidentally forgetting to swap tanks. And there's actually a message on the panel if you have this in manual mode. So you pretty much always do that in auto mode. If you want to manually shift it, let's say it starts, it flips over to the tank that's lighter, and you want to try to balance it out better by making it go back to the heavy tank, you can just push this button and it'll swap to the other side and restart the timer. And then autopilot and trims, you can have the trims working with the autopilot off in the middle position, or have autopilot plus your electric trims all working. And then the ELT, you can manually turn that on if you were in an emergency situation. Then up top you've got passenger oxygen, that upper one. If you remove that plastic guard and pull that down, the passenger oxygen masks in the back will drop, assuming that this is also on. This is the pilot's oxygen. When you turn that on in your startup process, you go to both masks that are for the pilot and co-pilot, and you do a quick test there to make sure they're getting air. So that's the top. Let's go ahead and power it up. And we'll go to GPU. Start using that instead of the battery. Alright. Panel's booting up. Give it a second. Whenever you've got power applied, you got these sort of beacon lights going off on the wingtips just automatically. There's no switch for those. See those going there. Alright, so let's just run through the switches here, and we'll start at the bottom and work our way up. Let me clear these master warnings and cautions. There'll probably be another one coming up. Down here to the left of the yoke, down low, is the icing system. So airframe ice de-icing will turn on the boots. Ice light is a exterior light that just shines on those so you can see if there's ice. Prop ice turns on the heaters for the propeller blades. Windshield turns on the heaters there. There's a little wire mesh in there to warm them up. And then you have your pitot left heat and your right and stall heat. Those you turn on all the time when you're actually in flight. And then your inertial separator, which will keep foreign objects out of the engine. Up here we have a little circuit breaker light, just lights up a little light over there so you can see that better. And then here is a guarded switch for whether or not you're using the microphone that's just hooked up to your headset or one that's in the oxygen mask. So you could swap to that if you had to put the mask on in an emergency situation. This is the normal G1000 intercom management stuff over here, so I won't go through all that. G1000 primary PFD for the pilot. Master caution and warning lights. These come on when certain warnings come up, and you have to, it'll keep dinging until you dismiss them by pushing whichever button is lit up. This is a standby attitude indicator. Also has airspeed and altitude, which is cool. We have the Autopilot head unit. Again, this is a standard Garmin one. Has a couple of extra features beyond what I had in the Cirrus. One is half bank mode, which is automatic at high altitudes, telling the Autopilot to not bank so aggressively, and speed change mode here to work in Mach instead of knots. The other thing it has is redundancy in terms of you can transfer from using the pilot side avionics to the co-pilot side in terms of what the Autopilot, what commands the Autopilot follows. A 15-inch MFD in the middle, again pretty normal G1000 stuff. Keypad down here, part of the G1000 setup. This is the environmental control panel here for the TBM, and so you can control the cold air conditioning air that comes out of the little eyeball vents. There's one in the door here, and then there's one above you with the little light. You can either have that in auto mode or you can turn it to manual and control the fan speed. Then you can set the temperature that you want. If there's heat called for based on the temperature you set, that will come out on the floor level. And then where you want your hot air, if you need to basically defog the windscreen, you can do that there. Here's the bleed system. This is to pressurize the aircraft in flight. It's really quite automatic. You just go up and in the LFE section of the MFD, you tell it your landing elevation, landing field elevation, and the pressurization system will schedule everything it needs to make your pressurization be minimal when you land automatically. Pressure mode, auto, or you can ask for max differential pressure if you want the cabin altitude to be as low as possible, if you have say passengers that need that. And then you can dump all the cabin pressure with that in an emergency situation. I almost skipped the landing gear control panel here. Got your 3 green, your landing gear control, nice and beefy. You can check the lights on here with 2 little test buttons. One is a check down button, which flashes at roughly 10 Hertz, and then you have a light test button that just basically lights up everything here. When the gear is in motion, this interior light in the handle will be illuminated, and that's how you can check that. There's another lights test button over here. When you do that, make sure that all these interior lights work, which is a good check as part of your normal pre-takeoff checklist. Okay, underneath here, underneath the co-pilot yoke, you got your alternate static system. If your static ports freeze over, you can do an alternate source for that information, and then emergency ram air if you need to get outside air into here immediately in an emergency situation. You can do that. Got a couple of USB ports there for charging, and a way to put line into the audio system if you want to listen to music, and then a selector for which music source you want to listen to. It's also got, you can see my little cable wrapped around there, my charging cable. That's like a cigarette lighter plug there. Down there is a circuit breaker, and the red thing on the top of it, the little switch, is a guarded switch for essential bus tie. That pretty much disables everything but the bare minimum electrical gear in the aircraft. It even disables the landing gear, so you have to use that appropriately. And then the fire extinguisher. Last but not least is the redesigned throttle for the TBM. This is new for the 900. Basically, here's the trim wheel. That's pretty standard. They've kind of moved stuff around a little bit based on what I've seen with the older ones. This is the manual override. If there's a fuel controller problem for the primary way the engine operates, you can bypass that and put in fuel yourself, but you have to be very careful there to not over torque the engine, because you have basically direct control of that. And the situation you'd use that is if you see that your torque and your prop RPM are dropping off, but these guys, the gas generator speed, RPMs, and your ITT are still relatively normal values, that indicates something's up with that fuel controller, and you would just immediately go into the manual mode. The first, say, third of this really has no effect, and it's kind of to give you a little bit of dead space in that throw, but then when you get into this range, it starts applying fuel, and hopefully that would resolve the issue. Here we've got aileron trim left and right. The throttle control, there's some good videos about TBM online, so I won't go over all of that, but here's a takeoff go around button for the autopilot. That puts the autopilot mode into, well, since we're on the ground, it puts it in takeoff mode, puts the command bars in magenta where they should be for that. If you were flying, it would go into go around mode. So we call that the toga switch. But over on the, basically the right side here, it's acting as a condition lever. So you can go to low and high idle, and you bring it over here, you're in flight idle. You can pull up these triggers here to get into the taxi range, and that'd be the beta range, where it's less than idle but not quite, the propeller pitch isn't quite reverse yet. Into here is in reverse mode, which really you just use when you've landed and you're trying to slow down. You use that till about 40 knots. And then up here is just the normal power range for flight. So if you needed to feather it, you bring it back to here, you lift up this upper handle part, not the triggers, and you bring it over like this. This would be anytime it's over here, the prop will feather. And then when you want to do cutoff, you do the same thing. This is, of course, you go reverse when you're adding fuel at the start. Over here is just the flaps. They're nice and conveniently placed. I like those. A couple of cup holders down here underneath the fuel selector. And then we come to the yoke here. Yoke is redesigned as well for the 900. Mine's got a little iPad mount for an iPad mini here, which has been really handy. You have a control wheel steering button, which temporarily disables the autopilot. If you want to completely turn off the autopilot, you've got a button for that. It also interrupts any trim motion, so if the electric trim is acting up, you can kill it with that. And then you'd go up there to that silver switch and turn those off. Then you've got elevator trim here. You have to push it in and then do it, as well as yaw trim left and right. Up here you can clear your storm scope values on the MFD, so you want to reset and see what the latest lightning is. You can ident for your transponder so ATC can spot you easier, and you can start and stop the timer, which is part of what you do on the startup procedure. You want to make sure that certain events in the startup happen at a certain time. And then on the back side over here, there's your push to talk, and over here there's a toggle for the COM2 radios to swap frequencies. Alright, so that's it. That completes the pilot's view tour of the TBM 900. Okay, last but not least, here is a tour of the back cabin. It's a 4-seat setup. It's in a club configuration at the moment. You can remove these seats, you can push, you can rotate those 2 seats to face forward if you like. They even have a sort of a bathroom optional thing you can do to replace the cargo area here. And that's a little place that you can throw your bags. There is a table in here. We'll hop in, we'll climb up the stairs. table go in here, and it just pops out. So you can get a little work done if you need to. You can pull the shades down in these windows, which is handy when it's really sunny. Up here is where the oxygen mask would come out in a depressurization, a high cabin altitude situation. Much like the pilots, you got your vents and lights up top. And then over here, this window is a plug type of emergency exit door. And you can pop that little cover off that's labeled and bring that whole door in and escape out that hatch if you needed to. The seats are pretty comfortable. They've got little adjustments. You can, especially the back seats, you can recline them pretty far and even take a little nap if you need to. Here's the cabin temperature controls for the back. Typically I'm managing this up front using the pilot controls where you can override these, but you can set the temperature and the fan speed here when you give control back to the cabin. And then this door will lower the main cabin door that we just came in. First you have to bring up the little stairs, but you do that and then you can latch the door shut. And that's really the interior in the back here. There's some USB ports, headset ports, normal stuff, but it's simple, but it's pretty nice.